It was a crisp Saturday morning when the Anderson family arrived at the airport. Jordan Anderson, a brilliant aerospace engineer, walked hand in hand with his wife Clara, a history professor, while their two children, Noah and Ava, clung excitedly to their parents. The family was glowing with joy. This trip was special, not only because they were traveling together, but because Jordan was set to receive an international award for innovation in sustainable aviation. It was a moment of pride, a culmination of years of hard work and resilience. The children had never flown in an airplane before, and their eyes lit up as they gazed at the massive jets parked outside the terminal windows. They had read all about airplanes in books, but now they were about to sit in one. And not just any seat, first class. Jordan wanted this trip to be memorable, to show his children that they belonged in any space, no matter how exclusive. As they walked through the terminal, Clara noticed the occasional glance, the fleeting looks that hovered just a moment too long. She had felt this before, judgment dressed in curiosity, disbelief cloaked in politeness. But she smiled anyway. That was something she had taught herself to do a long time ago. You smile because your joy shouldn't shrink in the presence of someone else's discomfort. They reached the gate and handed their boarding passes to the agent, who scanned them without much expression. But as the family began walking toward the plane, the agent leaned slightly toward a colleague and murmured something. Clara caught the sideways glance but said nothing. It was probably nothing. Probably. Once on the plane, they found their seats, row 2, seats A through D. The plush leather and spacious cabin welcomed them, and Noah gasped, "Wow, this is amazing!" Ava jumped onto her seat, peering out the window and waving at the ground crew below. Jordan helped his children buckle in, then turned to Clara with a satisfied smile. "We made it. First-class treatment for a first-class family," he joked softly. Clara grinned and squeezed his hand. But then came the pause. The moment. A white, uniformed flight attendant approached them. Her hair was neatly pinned back, her lipstick perfectly applied. She leaned slightly, her smile practiced but thin. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm but courteous. "Are you sure you're in the correct seats?" Jordan blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, these are our seats." She glanced at the boarding passes again, then at them. "This is first class," she emphasized, as if they hadn't noticed the wide seats or the champagne cart. Clara's jaw tightened, but Jordan remained calm. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the boarding passes. "Here, 2A through 2D. The attendant took them, scanned the codes, and after a beat, her smile returned. "Ah, yes, my apologies." But the tone had shifted. The warm bubble of excitement had been pierced, ever so slightly. Ava looked up at her father, confusion written across her little face. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," Jordan said softly, brushing her hair back. "We're exactly where we belong." As the flight prepared for takeoff, the Andersons settled into their seats. Outside the window, the morning sun began to rise higher, casting golden rays over the tarmac. Inside there was a quiet tension, not loud, not even visible to many, but it was there. It always was. Still they were together, and this was their journey. A celebration, a moment of pride, and no side glance, no whispered comment, no subtle question could take that away from them. The plane was taxiing slowly toward the runway. Outside, the sun painted streaks of amber across the clouds, and inside the cabin, a quiet rhythm began to settle in. Passengers scrolled through in-flight menus or adjusted their seatbelts. The children, still buzzing with excitement, chattered quietly between themselves. Ava pointed out every truck, luggage cart, and aircraft she saw through the window, her voice filled with wonder. Jordan turned to Clara. "Do you remember your first flight?" Clara smiled, her eyes softening. "It was nothing like this. I was 13, flying with my aunt to Detroit. We sat in the back, near the bathroom. I was too nervous to even ask for water." Jordan chuckled. "My first time was for a job interview. I wore a suit 2 sizes too big. I think they could see my knees shaking." They laughed gently, the kind of laughter born not just from memory, but from knowing how far they had come. But as their joy settled in, so did something else. Across the aisle, the elderly white man seated beside Jordan hadn't said a word. He hadn't even acknowledged their polite greeting earlier. Instead, he sat stiffly, eyes straight ahead, arms crossed, lips pressed into a firm line. Every so often he glanced over, and though he never spoke, his silence said plenty. It was Clara who noticed it first. 2 rows behind them, a couple was speaking in hushed tones. The woman leaned toward her partner, whispering while subtly gesturing toward the Andersons. The man responded with a shake of the head, and then a brief snort as if something amused him. Clara caught their eyes for a moment. The woman quickly looked away. Jordan noticed too. He didn't say anything. He never liked making assumptions too quickly. But after years of lived experience, he had learned to read these moments like reading the weather. He could feel the cold coming before the clouds even rolled in. The flight attendant from earlier passed by again. This time she was pushing a cart of beverages. She stopped beside them. "Would you like anything to drink?" she asked. Her voice was now overly polite, careful. Jordan smiled and replied, "Just water for now, thank you." Clara asked for tea, and the children opted for juice. As the attendant poured the drinks, Ava leaned over to her brother and whispered, "Why did she ask if we were in the wrong seats?" Noah, older by 2 years and already protective, said in a hushed tone, "Because sometimes grown-ups forget how to be nice." Jordan heard them and turned, resting a hand on each of their small shoulders. "You did nothing wrong," he said gently. "Never forget that." The flight attendant handed them their drinks and quickly moved on. Clara watched her go, wondering if the apology earlier had been sincere or simply procedural. Either way, the damage had been done. She looked at Jordan, and for a brief moment, they exchanged a glance filled with mutual understanding. It wasn't the first time, and they both knew it wouldn't be the last. They had chosen this flight, this class, this moment for their children, to show them the beauty of dreaming big, of earning a place at every table. But even in the clouds, there were shadows that followed. Jordan leaned back in his seat and exhaled slowly. He watched his children sip juice with wide eyes and joyful hearts, unaware of the complex emotions swimming just beneath their parents' composed surfaces. He reminded himself that they were here not just to fly, but to rise above small minds and tight hearts, to rise as a family, together. And the engines roared to life as the plane lifted off the ground, soaring into the vast blue sky. As the cabin lights dimmed slightly to signal the beginning of the in-flight meal service, a quiet hum settled across the passengers. Ava had fallen asleep with her head resting gently against Clara's arm. Noah was still wide-eyed, flipping through the kids' menu with fascination. Clara tucked a blanket over Ava's shoulders and kissed her forehead softly. Jordan looked at his daughter, then at Clara. "She's so peaceful," he whispered. "I hope the world is kind to her." Clara reached for his hand. "We'll teach her to be strong. Kindness doesn't always come freely, but strength that we can pass on." The conversation between the whispering couple 2 rows behind had resumed again, just softly enough to be inaudible, but persistent enough to be felt. The glances, the silence of the man beside them, and the earlier interaction with the flight attendant continued to hover around them like static in the air. Still, Clara tried to anchor her mind to something else, something better. "Do you remember when we first talked about taking this trip?" she asked. Jordan smiled, finally relaxing his shoulders. "You mean back when we still weren't sure we could even afford it?" She chuckled. "Back when you said, if I win that award, we're flying first class, even if we have to eat ramen for a month afterward." He laughed softly. "And here we are, first class and all. But no ramen," Clara added playfully. Jordan grew quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "It's strange," he said. "I thought this flight would feel like triumph, like finally breaking into a place we were always meant to be. But instead, Clara finished for him, "it feels like we're trespassing in someone else's dream." He nodded. "But we're not," she added firmly. "We belong here just as much as anyone. You earned this, Jordan. You built something that's going to change how the world flies. You did that." He looked down, humbled, not just by her words, but by the enormity of them. "I wanted the kids to see this, to know they deserve to dream big." "And they will," Clara said, "even if the world sometimes whispers otherwise." Noah tugged at Jordan's sleeve, interrupting their moment. "Daddy? Yes, buddy? Do you think I can be a scientist like you?" Jordan smiled, reaching over to ruffle his son's hair. "You can be anything you want, Noah. Scientist, astronaut, author, anything. Even a pilot? Absolutely," Jordan said. You can fly planes, build rockets, or even design your own airline. Noah beamed. I'll call it Anderson Airlines. Clara laughed quietly, careful not to wake Ava. That has a nice ring to it. A few rows ahead, a different flight attendant was helping another family settle in. Her voice was warm, her movements relaxed. She smiled easily, even offering to take a picture for them. Clara watched, feeling a pang of something between envy and grief. Not because the other family didn't deserve kindness, but because hers had to fight for it. The aroma of dinner service began to drift through the cabin. The tension from earlier hadn't disappeared completely, but for the moment it loosened its grip. As trays of food arrived, Jordan looked around, not for judgment, not for validation, but to soak in this moment with his family. He leaned over and whispered to Clara, "No matter how bumpy this ride is, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." She nodded. "This is our story, and we're writing it, one seat, one flight, one moment at a time." High above the earth, in a metal bird surrounded by both clouds and silence, the Andersons held on to each other, not because they were afraid, but because they had each other, and that was more than enough. Dinner trays had been cleared, the cabin dimmed further for rest. The hum of the engines grew softer, almost like a lullaby against the silence of the sky. Ava continued sleeping, her breathing soft and even. Noah had finally dozed off too, his head gently tilted onto Jordan's shoulder. Clara brushed crumbs from Noah's shirt and leaned back. For a moment, everything was still. But the stillness was short-lived. Jordan noticed the older man beside him, the one who had sat in stern silence since takeoff, begin shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The man cleared his throat loudly. Then again. He pressed his flight attendant button once. Then again. The light blinked above his seat like a flare. A few rows away, a flight attendant walked briskly toward them. "Yes, sir?" she asked. The man didn't look at her. Instead, he glanced sideways at Jordan, then back ahead. "I'd like to move seats," he said flatly. The attendant blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I don't feel comfortable here. Do you have an available seat in the back?" She hesitated. "We're pretty full today, sir." "Anywhere away from this section," he said, not bothering to hide the implication. Jordan didn't react. Clara, however, sat up straighter. Her eyes sharpened, though her voice remained steady. "You know," she said quietly, "we paid for these seats, just like you." The man didn't respond. He kept looking ahead, face flushed. Jordan spoke up. "If anyone should move, it's not us." The attendant looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. "Let me check with the crew." She walked away quickly, leaving behind a silence more deafening than before. Clara turned to Jordan. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I just didn't think we'd have to deal with this. Not like this." A few minutes later, the flight attendant returned with a forced smile. "Sir, unfortunately there are no open seats available in the back," she said to the man. Then she turned slightly to Jordan and Clara, her voice quieter, as if apologizing without actually doing so. "Please let us know if you need anything." The old man sighed audibly and crossed his arms again, but this time he didn't speak. Jordan glanced out the window. The stars outside seemed so close, so impossibly near. He let the silence stretch, then finally whispered to Clara, "It never ends, does it?" Clara took his hand, squeezed it. "No, but neither do we." They sat that way for a while, shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand, quiet warriors in a sky that had always belonged to them, even if the world below hadn't fully accepted that truth. As the night deepened, the cabin settled into a lullaby rhythm. Some passengers watched quiet films, others slept with eye masks and blankets. The Anderson family remained seated together, grounded in silence, still reeling from the encounter. But then something unexpected happened. A voice, gentle, hesitant, and coming from across the aisle. "Excuse me." Clara turned her head slowly. A middle-aged white woman, maybe in her 50s, was sitting alone. She looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I saw what happened earlier," she said softly, glancing at the old man beside Jordan, then back again. "And I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Clara blinked, unsure of what to say. "Thank you," she replied after a pause. The woman nodded, her eyes filled with quiet regret. "I should have said something sooner. I didn't know if it was my place, but I've got 2 grandkids your children's age, and I wouldn't want them to ever feel like they didn't belong." Jordan leaned in. "Sometimes silence can feel like agreement, but words like yours, they matter." The woman exhaled. I was raised to be polite, to not get involved, but maybe that's not enough anymore. Clara nodded. It's not. The woman offered a small, apologetic smile. Your family is beautiful, and your children, they're so bright. I just wanted to say that. Thank you, Clara said again, more warmly this time. That means more than you know. As the woman turned back to her seat, Clara felt something shift. It wasn't resolution, it wasn't justice, but it was a crack in the ice, a beginning, a reminder that not every eye held judgment. Some eyes held courage. Jordan looked over at Clara. That felt real. Clara nodded. One voice, one person. Sometimes that's all it takes to remind us we're not invisible. Noah stirred in his sleep, murmuring something unintelligible, then went still again. Ava shifted in her blanket, her small hand grasping Clara's without waking. They were still high above the clouds, far from their destination. But for the first time since takeoff, the cabin felt a little warmer. The hours stretched on quietly as the plane sailed through the night sky. The lights of distant cities flickered far below like forgotten campfires, too far to warm the people inside the jet. Jordan sat awake while the rest of his family slept. Clara's head rested against the window, her breathing soft. Ava still clutched her blanket like it held all the safety in the world, and Noah now curled into Jordan's arm, having unconsciously drifted there in his sleep. The gentle weight of his son reminded Jordan why this flight mattered. It wasn't just about travel. It was about visibility, about legacy. He looked across the aisle at the woman who had spoken earlier. She was reading a worn paperback, but every now and then she glanced over at them with a small, thoughtful smile. Jordan appreciated her words, but he also knew that kind of bravery was still rare. Most people saw things and said nothing. Most chose comfort over confrontation. And he understood it. He really did. But it never stopped hurting. He thought back to his own childhood, the time his father had driven him 6 hours to visit a science museum that refused to let them join the tour because the group was full. Later that day, his father bought them hot dogs from a street vendor and said, "Son, remember how they looked at us, and then remember to never let that stop you." He hadn't. And yet here he was, decades later, still being questioned, still having to prove that his presence was legitimate. He reached for his bag under the seat and pulled out a folder. Inside was a printed program for the award ceremony in New York. His name sat in bold letters under Keynote Honoree. He stared at it for a long time, tracing the words with his finger. He wished someone on this plane knew, that the man beside him knew, that the flight attendant had known, that the world didn't just see his skin, but also the weight of his achievements, the miles he had walked to get here. But then, would it change anything? Would respect offered only after credentials still be genuine? Noah stirred again and opened one eye. "Dad?" Jordan smiled and whispered, "Hey, buddy, can't sleep?" Noah shook his head sleepily. "I had a weird dream. You were flying the plane." Jordan chuckled. "Was I any good? You were the best pilot ever." He tucked the blanket around his son. "You always know what to say." Noah looked up at him. "Did that man next to you say something mean?" Jordan paused. "He didn't use any bad words, but sometimes it's not what people say, it's how they make you feel." Noah thought about it. "I didn't like him." "You don't have to," Jordan said gently. "But what matters is that you never treat someone the way he treated us, okay?" Noah nodded solemnly. "I won't." And with that, he closed his eyes again, his hand finding his father's and holding on tight. Jordan sat in the darkness, the hum of the aircraft beneath him, the stars above. Despite everything, the silence, the glances, the implied exclusion, he felt something powerful settle in his chest. They were still here, together. Seen or not, they were writing a new story, and no one could erase that. The sky had begun to shift from black to a soft, steel blue hue. Dawn was approaching. A flight attendant announced over the intercom that they'd be descending soon into New York. Clara woke with a soft stretch, blinking at the light peeking through the window. She looked over to see Jordan already awake, watching her with a warm, tired smile. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. He shook his head. "Didn't need to. Just needed to think." She placed a hand on his. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "I think so." Noah and Ava stirred in sync like twin notes in a familiar melody. "Are we there yet?" Ava mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Almost," Clara said, kissing her forehead. As they gathered their things, headphones, coloring books, scattered blankets, Jordan noticed the old man beside him reach for his cane. Their eyes met for a second. The man looked away first. There would be no apology, no acknowledgement. But that was okay. Jordan didn't need it anymore. A voice came over the speaker again. "Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." As seatbacks were raised and trays locked, the woman across the aisle leaned toward Clara again. "I hope the ceremony goes well," she said softly. Clara smiled in surprise. "How did you?" "I saw the folder," she said with a wink, "and I Googled him." Jordan laughed quietly. "I should have known. You deserve every bit of recognition," she continued, "and more." He nodded, humbled. "Thank you. That means a lot." The wheels touched down with a small jolt, and the cabin erupted in the usual rush. Phones turned on, seatbelts unbuckled too early, overhead bins opening. But the Andersons didn't rush. They stayed seated as the others pushed forward, some avoiding eye contact, others offering polite but distant smiles. The old man with the cane was helped up by a flight attendant and shuffled past them without a word. As the aisle cleared, the family rose together. Jordan took Ava's hand. Clara guided Noah. They walked forward with calm, steady dignity, as if the entire plane were a stage and their steps were a statement. "We are here. We always have been." The captain stood at the cockpit door, smiling at each passenger as they left. When the Andersons passed, he said, "Thank you for flying with us." Jordan stopped and looked him in the eye. "Thank you for getting us here safely." Outside the terminal, the air was crisp. A driver held up a sign with Jordan's name. He waved, but before they walked toward him, Clara stopped and pulled Jordan in for a quick photo of the kids standing beneath the terminal sign. "Memory," she said. "For them," Jordan added. They climbed into the car, and as the driver pulled away from the curb, Clara leaned into her husband and whispered, "You know what I see?" "What?" "A family that flies, no matter what tries to bring them down." The black car pulled away from the airport and wound through the streets of New York. Jordan looked out the window, watching the skyline rise, tall and full of stories, much like himself. He hadn't said much since the flight, but Clara knew him well enough to feel the swirl of thoughts behind his silence. The children chatted quietly in the back seat, excited to be in a new city. Ava pressed her face to the window, naming buildings and colors, while Noah held a small notebook, scribbling sketches of planes and clouds. When they reached the hotel, a concierge greeted them with warmth and efficiency. Their room had already been prepared, flowers, a welcome note, and a printed agenda for the awards gala the next evening. Jordan placed the program on the desk and stood at the window of their suite, looking down at the city below. Clara walked up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Big night tomorrow," she said softly. He nodded. "It's not just about the award anymore." "I know," she replied. "It never was." That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Jordan sat at the small writing desk by the window. He opened his laptop and began writing his speech. But no matter how many times he typed a sentence, he kept deleting it. Every word felt too small, too polished, too distant from the raw truth of their flight. Eventually, Clara joined him. "Want to read it to me?" He shook his head. "I haven't figured out how to begin." She sat beside him and took his hand. "Start from who you are." He closed his eyes. "I'm a father," he said slowly. "A husband, a dreamer, a boy who once built paper planes and prayed they'd fly, a man who has always had to prove he belongs, even in spaces he helped design." She squeezed his hand. "Now write that." And he did. The next evening, the ballroom at the Midtown Grand Hotel glowed with golden lights. People in suits and gowns mingled under chandeliers. Cameras flashed, laughter echoed, and on the stage stood a podium bearing Jordan's name. Backstage, he straightened his tie and looked in the mirror. His reflection stared back, nervous but sure. The announcer's voice echoed, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote honoree, Jordan Anderson." He stepped into the spotlight. Applause roared. He began. "Last night, my family and I boarded a plane to come here. We flew first class, not because we wanted to show off, but because I wanted my children to see what dignity looks like, what belonging feels like. But what we received instead was a reminder that even now, in the sky, we are still asked to prove our place." The room fell silent. "But I am not bitter. I am not angry. I am more resolved than ever." He went on, speaking not just of his work in aviation, but of the quiet turbulence that people like him face every day. Not in the air, but on the ground, in boardrooms, in airports, in glances that speak louder than words. When he finished, the room stood to their feet. It wasn't just applause, it was recognition. It was truth landing at last. The awards gala ended with photographs, handshakes, and a few teary congratulations. People came up to Jordan and Clara, offering words of support, of admiration, of understanding. Some shared their own stories, of bias faced, of ceilings broken, of silence endured. Back at the hotel room, Jordan took off his suit jacket and sat on the edge of the bed. Ava, still in her dress, had fallen asleep with a juice box in hand. Noah was trying to write about the night in his notebook, but kept yawning between words. Clara changed into her pajamas and sat beside her husband. "You were incredible tonight," she said. "I just told the truth," he replied, "and that's what made it powerful." He looked over at their children. "Do you think they'll remember this?" "They'll never forget it," she said, "because they saw you speak truth to a room full of power. They saw you fly without wings." Noah looked up. "Dad?" "Yes, buddy? Can I tell my class that you're famous now?" Jordan chuckled. "You can tell them that your dad stood up for what matters. That's better than fame." As the city lights sparkled outside, Clara turned off the lamps. The room was quiet again. But this time it was not the silence of discomfort. It was peace. A peace earned not by escaping conflict, but by walking through it with head held high. As they drifted into sleep, Jordan whispered, "We didn't just take a flight." Clara murmured, "We made history." And the sky, so vast and quiet outside their window, carried their story forward. One whispered across generations, one remembered in hearts. A story not just about a family, but about rising, about refusing to be made small, about flying anyway.